On July 22nd, 2026, a woman sat down in front of a microphone and read a kidnapper's letter out loud. Not an FBI agent, not a sheriff, not a prosecutor standing at a podium with a seal on the front of it. A podcast. Her name is Brianna Whitney. Until May, she was a reporter at AZ Family, the Phoenix television station that covered this case from the first weekend. Then she left local news and went to work for Crime Junkie, the biggest true crime show in the country. And on July 22nd, sitting across from host Ashley Flowers, she read the opening line of what she said was the first ransom note sent in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. "Hello, Savannah. We have your mother, Nancy." That letter was written in the first days of February. It was addressed, by name, to one of the most recognizable journalists in America. It was sent to news outlets. Law enforcement has had it for nearly 6 months, and the American public heard what it actually said for the first time this week, from a podcast. Here's what you need to understand about that, and I want you to sit with it before we go 1 inch further. Whitney said on air that she had expected this information to come from the FBI or from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. She said the official, credible information should be coming from them. It didn't. The Pima County Sheriff's Department, which is the lead agency on this case, has not held a news conference since February. So let's ask the question this entire episode is built on, the one nobody covering the ransom note this week bothered to ask. Who is actually running this investigation? Because for 6 months, an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility has been gone from her own home in the middle of the night. There is no body. There is no named suspect. There is no arrest. There are 3 people who were detained and released and never explained. And the most substantive public disclosure in months came from a microphone in a podcast studio. That's not a true crime story. That's an institutional failure with a true crime story wrapped around it. Let's be forensically precise about what we actually know. Start with the house. Catalina Foothills, north of Tucson. A residential neighborhood in the desert, the kind where a driveway is long and a neighbor is not close. Nancy Guthrie lived there. She was 84 years old, the mother of NBC Today co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, and on the night of Saturday, January 31st, her family had her over for dinner. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, drove her home afterward. Accounts of the exact time vary between roughly 9:30 and 9:45 that evening, depending on which official statement you read. And that small discrepancy is worth noticing, because it is one of the very few timeline details anyone has been willing to put on the record at all. That was the last time anyone saw her. The next morning, Sunday, February 1st, Nancy Guthrie did not appear for her online church service. Her family has said she never missed it. Around noon, a relative called 911. Now here's the detail that tells you how fast this stopped being a missing persons case. Homicide detectives went to the house. Authorities acknowledged at the time that this is not standard protocol for a missing person. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos held a press conference and told reporters there was grave concern. He said Nancy was not known to have dementia or Alzheimer's, that she was of sound mind, but that she had physical ailments limiting her ability to move around. Reuters reported she could not have left her home unaided and needed daily medication. And within days, Nanos said it plainly. They had a crime. A law enforcement source told Fox News Digital there were blood drops leading from the entryway, out and down the pathway toward the driveway. Blood on the porch. Blood on the street beyond it. Savannah Guthrie later told Hoda Cope that her mother was taken in her pajamas. No shoes, no medicine. Think about that combination for a second. An 84-year-old woman who couldn't move around easily, no shoes, no medication, in the desert, in the dark, in February. And on the front door, a Nest doorbell camera. On February 10th, the FBI released images from it. A masked figure at the front door, in the early morning hours of February 1st, appearing to tamper with the camera. Face mask, gloves, a black Ozark Trail hiker pack, average build, roughly 5'9" to 5'10". FBI Director Kash Patel put a surveillance photo out publicly. That was the moment this case had everything a break requires. A crime scene, biological evidence, video of a person at the door, national attention, a family with a platform. That was February 10th. It is now July 24th, 2026, and no one has been publicly named as the person in that footage. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Nancy Guthrie's family deserves to see how many people are still paying attention 6 months in. Because attention is the only thing that has moved this case at all. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this case is going to break on a lab result, and when it does, you need to be here. Now let's talk about who she was, because she has become a headline, and she was a person. Nancy Guthrie was 84. She had 3 children, Annie, a poet, Cameron, and Savannah, who has co-anchored the Today Show since 2012. Almost everything the public has been given about her comes from the people who love her, and it comes in fragments, because grief doesn't hold a press conference either. Here is what those fragments show you. She had a ritual. Every Sunday, a church service, and after the pandemic, she watched it online. Her family has said she never missed it. That is not a small detail. That is the single most important behavioral fact in this entire case, and I want you to understand why. Nancy Guthrie's disappearance was not discovered because someone broke down a door. It was discovered because a woman who always showed up didn't. The alarm that started this case was a reliable person becoming unreliable for one morning. That is the whole trigger. A ritual. She was, by every official description, physically vulnerable. Limited mobility. Daily medication. A sheriff's department that used the phrase vulnerable adult and meant it literally. Reuters reported she could not have left her home on her own. And she was, by the same official descriptions, entirely sharp. No dementia, no Alzheimer's, sound mind. Hold both of those at once, because most people don't. A woman who could not walk away and would not wander off. There is no version of this where Nancy Guthrie let herself out into the desert. The physical evidence and the medical description agree with each other completely. Which means, from the first weekend, investigators were not looking for a lost woman. They were looking for somebody who took one. Her family understood that immediately. On February 5th, at 5 in the evening, as a deadline written into a ransom note expired, her son Cameron recorded a video. He said they wanted to hear from whoever was holding their mother. He said they hadn't heard anything directly, and that they needed a way to communicate. Read that again. A family, on camera, begging a kidnapper for a channel of communication. Not because they were in negotiation, because they weren't. Because nobody would talk to them. Savannah Guthrie posted publicly and repeatedly. She thanked the FBI's Phoenix office and the Pima County Sheriff's Department for their work. She offered a reward of up to $1 million of the family's own money, which, combined with law enforcement's, pushed the total past $1.2 million. On a recent broadcast, she said 4 words that have followed this case ever since. Somebody knows something. That's the family. Public, cooperative, generous, patient, and 6 months later still standing in the exact same place they were standing in February. Now let's talk about what the people with badges have been doing. Here's what most people don't understand about the Nancy Guthrie investigation. The problem was never a shortage of evidence. It was who was holding it. February 1st, the scene. Blood outside the entryway. Biological evidence inside the home. a doorbell camera with a masked figure on it. Within weeks, investigators had collected roughly 16 gloves from the area around the house. Most turned out to be discarded by search volunteers, but one, recovered about 2 miles from Nancy's home, was different. It carried a usable DNA profile, and the FBI said it appeared to match the gloves worn by the figure in the surveillance footage. That is as close to a break as this case has ever come. It went nowhere. The DNA on that glove traced back to a person who works at a restaurant near where it was found. Sheriff Nanos said, "That person has nothing to do with the case." There was no match in the federal database. Investigators began looking at genetic genealogy, the Ancestry and 23andMe approach that has cracked cold cases across the country. Meanwhile, back at the house, there was a hair sample. Now stay with me, because this is the single most damning documented fact in this entire episode, and it has almost nothing to do with ransom notes. In the days after Nancy disappeared, the Pima County Sheriff's Department sent a hair sample recovered from inside her home to a private laboratory in Florida. 11 weeks later, with no answers, that sample was sent to the FBI for more advanced testing. And in April, an FBI official posted publicly on X that this was not new evidence and not new information, that the FBI had asked to test that DNA 2 months earlier, using the same technology it had always had, and that the local sheriff had instead sent it to a private lab. Let that land. 2 months. On a hair sample from inside the home of an abducted 84-year-old woman. 2 federal agencies and a county sheriff's department. And the fight was over which building the evidence got to sit in. Remember the question, who is actually running this investigation? Because in April, the answer the public got was, apparently, both of them, and not at the same time. There's more, and it's older than April. On February 19th, Sergeant Aaron Cross, president of the Pima County Deputies Organization, that's the deputies' own union, inside Nanos's own department, told the New York Post that it was a common belief within the agency that this had become an ego case for the sheriff. Reporting at the time indicated the FBI was eager to take control of the investigation, but couldn't simply do it. Critics said the outdoor crime scene near the porch was released too quickly. Nanos pushed back publicly, dismissing critics as haters. Separately, the Pima County Board of Supervisors sought to have Nanos give sworn testimony regarding his work history and leadership. Now stack the timeline the way nobody has stacked it for you. February 10th. Federal surveillance images released. National coverage at maximum. February 19th. The sheriff's own deputies union publicly questioning his handling of the case. April. The FBI publicly noting it had asked for the DNA 2 months earlier. July 1st. An FBI statement that contradicts a wire service report about that same case. 4 data points across 5 months. Not one of them is about the kidnapper. All 4 are about the people looking for him. And here's the number that makes it hurt. More than 18,000 tips were called in to the FBI. Fabian Pacheco, chief of detectives for the Pima County Attorney's Office, told CBS News that roughly 10% of leads had value. He also said something that has aged into an indictment, that it only takes 1 tip to break a case open. 18,000 tips, 1,800 of them with value. 6 months, no name. If this story is affecting you, if you believe an 84-year-old woman deserves better than a jurisdictional turf war, share this video. Every share is another person who might be the one holding that 1 tip, and the more people who know Nancy Guthrie's name, the harder it becomes for whoever did this to stay invisible. So let's talk about the systemic problem, because the ransom note story this week is a symptom, not the disease. Here is the disease. In a case this size, the public information channel is not a courtesy. It's an investigative tool. Tips come from people who know what to look for. People know what to look for because someone tells them. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has not held a news conference since February. That is the fact under everything else. Not a rumor, not an opinion. 5 months of no podium. And into that silence walked everybody else. On July 1st, on News Nation's Jesse Weber Live, crime scene investigator Cheryl McCollum said it flatly. This investigation is so botched. Her criticism was specific, and it's worth being precise about it, because it's been stretched all over the internet since. McCollum's point was about unity of message. She said, "You have not seen Savannah Guthrie and her family standing on the same podium as the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff. That they should have been standing together, making statements from day one, and that they were not on the same page." That's not a forensic critique. That's a communications critique. And it's arguably worse, because communications is the part they controlled completely. The Sheriff's Department's public position has been that every tip and lead is taken seriously and forwarded to detectives working in coordination with federal agents. On questions about the ransom notes specifically, the department referred reporters to the FBI. Referred them to the FBI, the lead agency, referring questions about the letters written to the victim's family to the agency that is not the lead. Who is actually running this investigation? And then, on top of that silence, the status of the case itself started shifting in public without anyone standing up to explain it. In June, reporting indicated the investigation had been restructured as a no-body murder case after 4 months without remains. By mid-July, coverage described it as an active homicide probe with no suspect publicly named. But on July 2nd, the FBI's Phoenix office stated that the case continues to be investigated as a kidnapping for ransom. So, as of July 24, 2026, the public record contains both descriptions, and no agency has stood at a microphone to reconcile them. Whether Nancy Guthrie's case is formally a homicide investigation, a kidnapping investigation, or both at once depending on which agency you ask, is, as of this date, unconfirmed. That is the environment the ransom note walked back into this week. Now let's do the part everybody wants, and let's do it honestly. Let's test what these notes actually are. You want the notes to be real, of course you do. A real ransom note means a real kidnapper, a real chain of custody, a real Bitcoin address, and a real thread that a forensic accountant can pull until a name falls out. Real is terrifying, but real is solvable. So let's test real, and let's see if it survives contact with the record. Start with what was received. In the days after Nancy disappeared, 3 media outlets got a ransom note. The first was sent on February 3rd. It demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin. It contained 2 deadlines, with the demand increasing the longer payment took. The Los Angeles Times reported that people who read it described it as carefully crafted, and that it contained details that had not been released to the public. That's the note Brianna Whitney read on July 22nd. She said it opened by addressing Savannah directly, said Nancy was safe but scared, said she'd be held a maximum of 7 days, and released unharmed within 12 hours of payment to a Bitcoin address at a safe drop-off location in Tucson. And it closed with a line built to do maximum damage to one specific human being. Her life is in your hands. Whitney said the note contained 2 details only the abductor would know. Crime Junkie did not publish copies of the documents. The authenticity of the note has not been independently verified. Then it got stranger. On February 6th, a second note went to a Tucson television station saying Nancy had died shortly after being taken. NBC News reporting indicated that note asked for no payment at all and contained no apology. Read that again. A kidnapper who stops asking for money. Then, months later, a different voice entirely. In April, TMZ reported receiving notes from someone claiming Nancy was dead and placing her in the state of Sonora, Mexico. That sender said he wasn't part of the crime, that he simply knew who was and where she was. He wanted 1 Bitcoin to say so. TMZ's Harvey Levin described nearly a dozen emails from the same man. That sender also expressed frustration with the FBI for dismissing his earlier messages as a scam. So now count the voices. A ransom demand. A death notice with no demand. An informant selling a name. At least 3 distinct authorial postures. Over 5 months. In a case with 1 victim. Now ask yourself the obvious question. If you're the FBI, how do you sort that? Here's how it went publicly. And this is where the story everyone told you this week falls apart. On June 30th and July 1st, Reuters reported that an FBI official said 3 notes had been determined to be fake, 2 ransom demands sent to media outlets in early February, and a 3rd sent to TMZ. Forbes, and a wave of coverage behind it, ran with it. The notes were fake. Then, on the same day, the FBI's Phoenix office put out its own statement. It said the Bureau and its task force partners had received several ransom notes. It said some had been deemed extortion attempts without legitimacy. And then it said the part that got buried under a week of headlines. Other ransom demands may potentially be legitimate and are still being investigated as such. The statement went further. The case continues to be investigated as a kidnapping for ransom, and local authorities remain the lead. So here is where the record actually sits, as of July 24th, 2026. A wire service says an FBI official called 3 notes fake. The FBI's own Phoenix office says some notes are fake and others may be real and are still being worked. A criminal profiler told Fox News he doesn't believe the notes are real, based on the sender's behavior not matching the suspects. And a separate strand is confirmed fraudulent. A California man pleaded guilty to 2 felony counts of harassment using a telecommunication device for sending imposter ransom demands designed to extort and harass Nancy Guthrie's family. At least 1 person definitely faked one of these. That is a matter of public record and a guilty plea. Whether the February 3rd note, the one read on that podcast, is authentic, is not. And that is the entire point. Because for a week, the loudest version of this story online has been that the true crime internet is chasing a hoax. That version is not supported by the FBI's own words. The Bureau did not say all the notes are fake. The Bureau said some are fake, some might not be, and it's still treating this as a kidnapping for ransom. There's one more theory in the mirror, and I'm going to handle it the way it deserves. In May, a wrench attack theory surfaced, and Whitney and Flowers revisited it on the July 22nd episode. As of July 24th, 2026, no agency has publicly endorsed that theory, and the specifics behind it are not established in the public record. I am not going to build a narrative on it. Neither should anyone else. Which brings us back around, one more time, to the only question that is held up for 6 months. Who is actually running this investigation? Not because the answer is a conspiracy, because the answer determines whether that February 3rd note ever gets adjudicated in public at all. And right now, 2 agencies have given the public 2 different accounts of it, and neither has stood at a podium to sort it out. So here's what investigators have, and here's what they don't. They have blood, outside the entryway, on the pathway, on the street. They have video, a masked figure at the front door in the early hours of February 1st, tampering with a Nest camera, face mask, gloves, black Ozark Trail hiker pack, average build, roughly 5'9" to 5'10". They have a glove with a DNA profile that came back to someone with no connection to the case. They have a hair sample from inside the home that spent months moving between a private lab and the FBI, while the 2 agencies disagreed publicly about where it should have gone. They have mixed DNA, and this is the piece from that podcast that actually matters. Whitney reported that investigators obtained mixed DNA from inside Nancy's home, multiple profiles in a single sample. They have to be separated. Nancy's profile is expected to be in there. The question is, whose else? As of July 24, 2026, that separation is not publicly reported as complete. 6 months, a mixed sample, still unseparated. Here's what they don't have. No body. There have been searches of the desert around the property by local, state, and federal teams, and no remains have been recovered. No named suspect. The figure on that camera has never been publicly identified. No arrest connected to the abduction itself. The only guilty plea in this case belongs to a man who faked a ransom demand, not to anyone who touched Nancy Guthrie. No explanation for the detentions. Whitney reported that 3 people were detained during the first month of the investigation. One of them, a DoorDash driver who lived about an hour south of Nancy's home. All 3 were released. No agency has explained why any of them were detained. Nothing has come of it. As far as is publicly known, there have been no other detentions. Let me be clear about this. They were released, and nothing in the public record connects any of them to this crime. No press conference since February, and no agreement, none, on whether the letters written to a woman's family in the days after she vanished are real. On July 17th, former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer posted publicly, comparing Nancy's case to that of an 80-year-old woman who vanished 40 years ago and whose remains were only recently identified through advanced DNA testing. Her argument was simple: search harder, expand into the remote desert, update the billboards, raise the reward. 40 years is what happens when a case goes quiet. If you know anything at all, call the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. You can remain anonymous. The reward is over $1.2 million, and it is real. And based on this department's own numbers, roughly 1 in 10 calls has value. That could be yours. February 3rd, a letter is written. July 22nd, the public hears it. 170 days in between. In that gap, 18,000 tips. A glove that led nowhere. A hair sample that sat in the wrong building for 2 months. 3 people detained and released without explanation. A mixed DNA sample still not pulled apart. A deputies' union questioning its own sheriff. A wire service and a federal field office describing the same evidence 2 different ways. A case status that changed in public without a single official standing up to say so. And no press conference since February. Nancy Guthrie was 84. She could not walk out on her own. She never missed a Sunday service. She was taken in her pajamas, without shoes, without her medicine, in the dark. 6 months later, the most complete thing the public has been told came from a microphone. Somebody knows something. Savannah Guthrie said that, and she's right. And here's the harder version of it. Somebody with a badge knows more than any of us do, and they have not said it out loud since February. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because when that mixed DNA finally separates, and it will, this case breaks in a single afternoon, and you'll want to be here when it does. Nancy, wherever you are, we're still looking for you.